Hey everybody, welcome to Bitter Food Radio, and it's me, Keris, and I haven't got Matt today. He's actually poorly in bed, very sadly. But I do have a guest who I'm really excited to introduce to you all. She's actually a very good friend of mine and a fellow nutritionist, and who also practices other things like reflexology as well. She's very much branched out. But the reason that I wanted to get her onto the podcast is she has been a big part of my life in the last 5 years after I started to really struggle with some health issues. And she very much started to get me to look at things very differently and teach me some things that I think would be really helpful for all of you to hear. Adriana, before I say any more, I would love you to introduce yourself and just tell us a little bit about your story first, and then I've got plenty of questions for you.
Hi there. My name's Adriana. I am a qualified nutritional therapist, although I don't currently practice nutrition. I practice reflexology and Reiki. And a spiritual warrior and friend to Keris.
The last one is probably the most challenging of all of those things.
Great pleasure.
So the reason that I really wanted to get Adriana on the podcast was I feel like she models a few things that whether you're on a journey in terms of looking at spirituality or any of these things, or whether you believe, we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But what she really modeled to me was self-compassion and mindfulness and a different pace of life and a different way of living. And we actually met a few times, and so I genuinely feel like we were meant to meet and spend quite a lot of time together walking our dogs, because you eventually got a dog, which was brilliant. But we actually met through a mutual friend, Emma Myhill, who's been on the podcast, at her wedding, and then we just kept bumping into each other. If you remember, there's like 3 or 4 times. I think eventually you came across me sat in Pret crying into a coffee because I was really unwell and just a bit lost with it all, and you said, let's walk the dogs. And this is when you started to really talk to me about, I guess, a different way of looking at my health struggle, which was I tried all of the fixing, the finding solutions, the obvious stuff, the nutrition, changing my job roles, resting more. But what I hadn't really changed was my headspace and the way that I looked at things and the way that I talked to myself and the kind of pace that I wanted to really live my life. And the more that we walked, the more I began to see in you, a different way. And so I'd love you to start by sharing just a bit about your journey, because obviously we've talked and I know that you have also had some challenges in your life, and this is what brought you to living a little bit more mindfully, thinking about things differently. And I know you had some great books and inspirations on your journey as well.
Yeah, so I ended up training in nutrition probably as a result of having an unhealthy relationship to food from when I was a child, from when I was about 9 or 10. I think I used it as a tool. Well, I think I used it as a distraction when I had emotions that I probably didn't know how to manage. So when you're young, I mean, I don't know if I could have named those emotions when I was 9 or 10. And I got into that habit, had a lot of time on my own. I was alone in the house, like in the before and after school, and I'd find myself overeating. And obviously, then along comes that is a lot of shame and guilt. And I kind of got into that habit from a very young age and took that through my teenage years. And it kind of became very entrenched. And it was only when I was in my early 20s after traveling that I realized, well, for one, when I traveled in Asia, I started to understand and recognize how food made me feel, because there wasn't during the day, you'd kind of focus on what meal you were going to have next. Things like chili and ginger and garlic, I started to notice how that made me feel afterwards. And at the end of that big trip, where food had always been a real problem for me, I felt like it could actually be an amazing thing to work with, and it could be something that I could help myself and others with. So that's why I decided to study nutrition, thinking that by doing that, it would kind of solve all of the emotional eating. And yeah, and I love studying nutrition. I think it's such a powerful tool. Ideally, they teach it in schools because it's just like intrinsic knowledge that ideally everybody would learn. Um, And after that, I had my kids, and still those themes of kind of guilt and shame and disordered eating were lessened, but they were still kind of bubbling under the surface. And then when my kids were born, I just thought I don't, and these things would come up, that I just got to a point where I thought I don't really want to live like this, because it's going to start impacting my kids. So I went on a bit of a journey of discovery. I tried a few different therapies. One that I found helpful was EMDR. And although the process of having that, I wasn't sure if it was working, at the end of having those treatments, the lady I worked with said that the root cause of why I was having these issues was attachment issues. I was like, oh, I've not heard this before. And she said, and I said, okay, well, how do I heal from that? And she said, you've got to learn to love yourself. You've got to self-parent, basically. And that was about 8 years ago. And since then, I've been on a journey of day by day learning to be compassionate to myself and loving and kind, and using words that are positive towards myself, which for many years, I mean, I think it lessened over adulthood, but yeah, I've been on that journey since then. I mean, in terms of spiritual books, and I've had an interest in those areas since my early 20s, so things had come in and out of my life that supported me, but that, I'd say, about 8 years ago is when big changes started to take place.
And when you kind of were having the therapies, did they give you any techniques to start with, or any like helpful tools, or was it very much a journey of exploration that you just went on in terms of?
Yeah, it was my own journey, and I had always been attracted to books that so one of the in my early 20s, someone gave me a book called Stop Thinking, Start Living, and that was really powerful, because at the time I thought that I didn't even know that was possible, to not kind of live in my head. And then other books came into my life, The Power of Now, oh, lots. I would read those kind of books for pleasure, but it was only really after understanding that the way to heal was through self-love and compassion, was that I actually really put those things into practice.
Because I think a really difficult thing for people to understand at this point in time is most of the clients that Matt and I work with, most of the groups that we work with, have these ongoing battles with some crutches, and sometimes it is food, and food is used more for kind of, as you just mentioned, like a weapon or punishment against ourselves. So we either deprive ourselves of food, or we overindulge with food, or we start to develop dependencies. Not just food, it can be alcohol, cigarettes, spending money, going online shopping, like any of these things. And what our clients always report is that they don't want to do these things, but they almost can't stop themselves. And then what they do is trigger this cascade of guilt and shame. And when I started to look into this a little bit deeper and read about it, a lot of the great philosophers, talk about the fact that we as a human race are addicted to suffering. So we'll often start to repeat these things. But I also believe that they were protective at one point. So as you said, you developed the food kind of, maybe the focus on food as a protective mechanism at some point, to distract yourself from something that you did not want to feel. What would you kind of suggest people do as they start to maybe see themselves in some of the things that you're saying? Is there like any first steps that you think would be helpful? Because also it can be a lot to take all this on board, and it is a very
Absolutely.
freeing journey, but it's also a difficult one to begin.
I think it's first maybe good to reflect on what the thing that whatever your habit is, what is that fulfilling, like, or what exactly are you trying to avoid? So for me, it was I was an emotional eater, be it happy, sad, anything in between. And I was able to reflect that I would eat, it was just filling a void. It was filling a lack of connection. So
Yeah.
I think you sometimes, if you drink, like when you're stressed, or if you smoke, or whatever it might, or exercise, it's kind of, you first have to ask yourself what need is that filling, because you can't fulfill that need in another way. unless you actually know what it's addressing. Is it loneliness? Is there a common theme or emotion throughout your life that you carried with you? And if there is, it might be something that you need to go and have counselling about or have support with. But it's kind of being honest and holding a mirror up and thinking like, what am I jamming down, or what am I filling up with something to avoid what emotion, what feeling?
Yeah, I came across a phrase, I said it on the last podcast, but I think it's worth repeating, which is often, this has actually kind of come from the mind body space when they're talking about why people fall chronically ill. And they say what's empty needs filling and what's full needs emptying. And I thought that's a really powerful statement because, again, we're kind of in a world that can keep us so busy and distracted now with technology that this can run and run. But the one thing that tends to kind of tripwire the situation is usually illness. And so the body doesn't like some of the things that we're depending on, although they serve us in some way. And as I said, it is protective, which is why we shouldn't feel the guilt and shame. There's usually a kind of often an adverse health outcome if it's excessive. And that's normally what kind of forces us to face facts. Not everyone gets there. Like some people do get away with it, but
One thing I would say is sometimes when you want to make changes in this part of your life, you don't always have to focus on the part of you that you feel is broken. It by beginning to introduce acts of self-love and self-compassion, which can be tiny little moments throughout the day, you actually start to bring in a different kind of energy into your life. And so the need to do the more destructive behaviors can often just fall away without even trying. So it's funny, isn't it? Because yes, it can be hard on there's challenges on the journey, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard struggle that we have to kind of get through. If we start to bring in more positive, and it's not all about being positive all the time and everything's great, but it's the more we bring in tiny acts of self-love and compassion, and acknowledge that that is necessary, because we all need unconditional love. And with the best will in the world, a lot of people probably didn't receive it because our parents, all doing their best, probably didn't receive unconditional love themselves. Everyone was kind of doing the best they could. Our generation, if we realize that, okay, unconditional love is necessary for health, and I mean health in like the whole sense, that is something that we can all give to ourselves. And it's just like tiny, tiny, tiny little steps along that path that's how we start to heal.
yeah.
And the things on the outside just become less necessary. These are more coping strategies that we've developed probably from when we're very young, how we manage our stress, or and with umpteen things that cause these things in our lives. But
I think that the childhood piece is quite important because, as I know, Gabor Mate talks a lot about this, the link between attachment and authenticity. And he kind of talks about the fact that if you didn't have the unconditional love and attachment, so connections, safe connections throughout your childhood and teens, and I don't know many people that did, to be honest. And if you moved around a lot, or most of us got bullied and experienced, kind of adverse childhood experiences, then you kind of lose your authenticity because you want to attach, so you want to fit in more. And I think this also is where, for a lot of women, the body image piece comes in really loudly, and increasingly for men as well. I work with more female clients, so I just know that's a fact from hearing their body image story. But especially in the kind of teenage years, when we're compared to our peers and we're trying to maybe attract a partner and things, it becomes, and then we obviously had this explosion of social media a bit later, but we already had media in the form of magazines and TV. This is where I think we almost try and shape shift and be something that we're not. And what's really frightening about that is that can go on for a lot of people, including myself to some degree, that goes on for a long period of time before you realize that a lot of your actions, a lot of your thoughts, and a lot of your words aren't really yours, and you're constantly apologizing for your existence. I've just finished Miranda Hart's book. I know I recommend it to you, and she talks about trying not to say sorry, like sorry for this, sorry for that, sorry for being late, sorry for not turning up, sorry for being here, and it's almost. But another thing she mentioned was she developed an inner critic, which I'm sure you're probably familiar with that, and said that she labeled her inner critic, gave it a name so that she could see it coming in, and reinforcing many of the kind of the conditions. When you talked about unconditional love, or what are the conditions that we've put in place, and it is often, I need to be a certain size, I need to, you know, be a certain fitness, or lift certain weights, or achieve a certain you know, kind of income bracket, or get a promotion at work. We put all these conditions, and goals are good, but I think a lot of the time they're more conditions to be, when I get there, I'm good enough. And that's,
Yeah.
and we're using it to kind of like beast ourselves a little bit.
Oh, I know. I mean, I spent so many years in kind of a state of self-hatred for my, you know, my physical body from childhood, and it's such a poor use of your energy. You
Yeah.
know, you think if you could get that energy back. But one of the things that I started doing when I understood again about how to heal is that, I mean, it's such a simple exercise, but I think I told you a few years ago, I went to see a yoga teacher once, and we were talking about feet, and I said, "Oh, I hate my feet," and she said, "Oh, well, that's interesting because often the way you think about your feet is how you think about yourself." And I was like, and I, as a reflexologist, everybody apologizes for their feet, and I'm like, I couldn't care less what your feet look like.
Yeah.
I'm no different to hands, feet. Well, I'm not judging you on the. My feet are strange looking. Most people have strange looking feet, but to hate now, the idea, who hates a part of their body? Like if that didn't work, you wouldn't be here. So when I used to go on my dog walks, I'd have this little thing. I'd say thank you feet, because you take me on this walk, and I love walking because I love being in nature. And I'd work up my body, you know, calves, knees, hips, all these things. And it might sound, I don't know, cheesy, and are you saying these things and do you believe them? But when you're out walking, say, you can believe them. You're on your own. You say them out loud or say them in your head. But you know, your hands are such a necessary part. Just feel gratitude that they even exist. Like, I don't know, this is self-love. It's like, this is the body that you're living in now, and it's getting you to be alive now. It's like learning to enjoy and be grateful that, like, your heart beats. Not every, you know, a lot of people's hearts stop beating early. Like, yours is still working, so be grateful for it. It's, I don't know, I feel like sometimes going onto the physical body and thanking it for what it allows you to do is a beginning of how we can love ourselves. And yeah, that's just, I don't know, I think that's just quite a powerful tool.
It's really interesting you say that, because I've just been in bed with a virus where I couldn't move. The fatigue, it was like my body was like lead. And the first day that I could get up and go for a walk again, I remember thinking, I'm just so grateful to walk. And you take all this for granted. But equally, I deal with a lot of clients who have injuries, and they want to fix the injury really fast. But I often think that if we fix the injury, are you going to go back and maybe not possibly respect the body as much? Because a lot of injuries come from overtraining, and a lot of overtraining comes from a kind of aggression to achieve a certain physique or body composition that might not, well, you know, I often ask clients, is it worth it? Is it, you know, what do we get at the end of it? Ruby Wax did a brilliant sketch on this where she said, like, I love the way that everyone wants six packs for when they next appear in a, you know, a perfume ad or a deodorant ad or whatever it might be. Like, we never, in the UK, you barely even get your six pack out. It's that cold all the time, you know. So what, we never question, we're kind of presented with these you know, ideals, and then we just go for it, and we get it ingrained. And actually, like you said, once you have that taken away, whether that be, you know, a wrist injury or a shoulder injury, you suddenly realize how incredible the body is, how much you needed, you know, you need that function. And really, to support function, like you said, we have to, just like our car, look after it, nourish it, resource it, you know, make sure we MOT it, rest it, recover it. And it is injuries I think are a blessing in disguise, and it will often take us away from the things that we're using to distract ourselves as well. It's like, which is for a lot of people, exercise, or, you know, just kind of being super busy in life.
Yeah, the importance of rest. If I ever injure myself through, I mean, I don't do intense exercise, but you can still get injuries or you can fall. Sometimes I'll fall. It's an opportunity to reflect on, right, I need to be a bit kinder to my body, or I need to not be rushing so much. It's like I need to slow down. I mean, these messages are all there, aren't they? But you just have to be willing to listen. And it's like listening to your body. We use our bodies as if they're kind of something that is, as if it's not part of who we are. You know, it's like our mind is something, our mind wants to do something. Well, our body also has needs as well. And it's kind of bringing all those together and listening to the body. You know, if you have pain, well, what you wouldn't further injure something that was in pain. You'd kind of care for that until it was better. So it's yeah, I think connecting to the physical body and having gratitude for the bits that work are it's a helpful tool.
One of the nicest things you've often said to me, in fact, you said it before this call, when I said I'm still recovering a bit and in that place where you're not quite 100%, but you feel well enough to do things, and you have this battle of like how much shall I put back on the plate essentially and aim to do, and you said, what would you tell a best friend in this situation now? And I think that's a great question to constantly ask ourselves, you know, when we're kind of looking at trying to change the dialogue that we have with ourselves, about ourselves, to ourselves, is, and I've actually used Hamish as an example and often thought, would you talk to Hamish like this? You know, just because I feel like he's such a, you know, he gives me unconditional love. So if I want to model it back to myself, I need to model it to him. Well, I need to express it to him. So I come up with a sentence, I can hear myself saying a sentence, and I think, would you say this to Hamish? You know, and you absolutely wouldn't, especially your dog, you know, it's like, so it's a nice kind of, I guess, a way of checking in on things. But another thing that you mentioned to me was you had started swimming. I always remember this conversation, and you said just being in a changing room with a lot of other women, and
Mm.
older women, and seeing bodies of all shapes, sizes, and ages was also a nice kind of equalizer, in that everyone's just so unique and different. So why are we all trying to look like somebody else? You know, it's just why is it this standard that most people don't even come near to, and never should, and never need to? Like the uniqueness is the beauty. And recently here, I've been to saunas and also a Temescal, but even here, because it's very more Europeans, all the saunas, everybody goes in naked. And just being a Brit, I remember thinking, I went in with my towel on, you know, I was like, and then I got in there and everyone was naked. And I was like, you actually look daft because everyone's naked. And I was like, right, I'll just drop the towel, it's fine. But even that, it felt very liberating to just sit and look at my body and not judge it, and nobody else was judging it, and we had amazing chats, and everyone looked completely different, and no one was hiding bits here and there. And I think there are little activities that maybe you can go and do where you actually just don't care anymore and drop the towel,
Yeah.
you know, and drop the mask. And I'm not saying run through the street naked, obviously, but I'm saying, are there things that you can do? Because I'm someone who's often been in a gym where there's a lot of focus and dialogue around weight loss, leanness, you know, looking a certain way. I get reinforcement. I've had criticisms like constantly as I've worked as a trainer, worked as a nutritionist. And it's a dialogue I wish would stop, really, that I'd love someone to just say, it's so nice to see you, rather than, you look great, what have you been doing? Your arms look amazing. You know, it's just because you think, well, should I decide not to do these press ups, will I not be respected in the same way? You know, I do think it's a dialogue that we could definitely start to change a little bit. I'm consciously trying not to comment on anybody's, you know, I did used to tell friends, you look really well, but now I'm just like, you look really happy, and that's great, you know, you look.
I mean, I've met people, you go, oh, you look really well, and they go, oh yeah, I've just gone through a divorce. Because people lose weight. People
That's
lose
why I
weight
look well.
under a lot of pressure. So I'm mindful now. You know, people go through awful things, and then they're looking a bit more svelte.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Similarly, I was going to say, with my gastritis, when I flare, I tend to lose a few kilos, and the comments come thick and fast. You look amazing. What are you doing? I wish I had what you had. It's just so wrong. You know, it's like, if you know, I would give I would give so much to not have this. You know, do you know the freedom that you have, you know, to not be suffering with a kind of GI illness? It's I don't know, something to be really not taken for granted, you know, not to have to think about these things. But go on, sorry, you were gonna say.
oh no, it just made me think, I guess one thing that you could do, or we all could do, is become more boundaried so that other people's comments are less impactful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, that's a loving act. That's a self-loving act. I think obviously you're someone that might receive comments because of your work, and I'm not saying that's easy if someone was, but it just brings me to you don't know why people are saying these things. You know, it's not really about you. They're just projecting their ideals onto you. So it's just learning to keep a little protective shield around yourself, really. And
Which actually brings me to another great point that you raised on a walk. We should talk about the four agreements in a second, because this kind of links to them really nicely. But you were saying about to judge others means that we'll continually judge ourselves. And that really resonated with me because, and again, I often repeat this to a lot of clients, we're kind of trained to judge. I think, you know, a lot of this came through society has become all about competition and self rather than community and connection. And especially I went to a girls' school, so this I think was reinforced a lot, maybe like, you know, whether it was academically, in sports, in terms of, you know, your body composition. There was so much comparison and competition. But also I think, again, with our parents, not to criticize them anyway, that generation was also kind of very focused on, you know, achievements and physical appearance as well. So it could be that we heard them judge. You could have heard grandparents' generation judge. I've definitely heard that a lot. And then it kind of comes down. So it's a dialogue that is constantly around you, within you. You're kind of repeating it. And when you kind of said those words, it was like, actually, I don't want to judge anyone else, and I don't want to judge myself anymore. And once you stop it and catch yourself, and it's hard, and it's Matt and I came to an agreement. We actually sat down with the four agreements and said, let's not judge, let's just have compassion to others, and then we'll be more compassionate to self. And it's been really good. We catch each other sometimes and say, no, like, we just don't know that situation for that person. And it always comes from a good place, I have to say, where we're never just judging. We will worry for somebody, or we want to help somebody, or we'll be like, why aren't they helping themselves? Like, why can't they just get this habit in place? So it's coming from a good place, but we've learned to really step back and actually, it's kind of compassion to others and empathy overrides everything. And then you start to feel that kindness to self come through. But again, not at all when you're taught self, you know, you need to love yourself more. We were all like, oh, what does that look like? Do I change my outfit? Do I, you know?
yeah, of course, it can seem quite abstract, can't it? It comes in a million ways.
That was a
Yeah,
great.
but it's funny. Yeah, so the four agree. I mean, Keris asked me a while ago about what books have been most influential to me, like, and there's been so many over the years. But normally I take one tiny thing from each one. But actually, I was reflecting that a book that I haven't even read is The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. But the four agreements from that are, if anyone isn't aware of them, are four kind of statements of how to live that was based on a culture that were precursors to the Aztecs. And so there's don't make assumptions, don't take things personally, always do your best, and use the direction of the word to speak it in truth and love. And what you were talking about, like, don't when with judging, don't make assumptions that you know what another person's going through or what's motivating them to do something or not do something. That's so powerful, isn't it? It's so easy when we have a caring role, we often feel like we probably know more about a person than we're just kind of painting a picture of that person. But unless they share exactly what you don't always know exactly what's going on for someone. So I think that's again, you wouldn't want other people to be making assumptions on you. So though assumptions, judgment, probably there's a bit of it's a bit interchangeable, isn't it?
And I think that
And
really helps as well if you're kind of in a bit of a, you know, a conflict situation with a family member, a colleague at work, anyone who's probably not going to disappear from your life and you can't create that space. I think it really helps to, all of the four agreements are kind of relevant here. It's almost like be as truthful and as honest as you can. You know, don't do the back behind the back sort of stuff. Don't but don't judge and don't assume things, because often that person may be having such a battle and struggle. But when you actually let go of that situation and decide to just, just offer compassion and do your best. Yes, there may be triggers, but I think it really does relieve you of a lot of suffering, because I've been in kind of work situations which involve bullying, and they were terrible. And I look back now and think, God, if I could have just had a bit more competency over my boundaries, or, kind of my reactions to those situations, or just empathize with them and not got involved in the drama and the politics, I would have been healthier. I would have been happier. I wouldn't have had, so many digestive issues through that, because often we're taking on that kind of, that those emotions end up somewhere. And so for a lot of us, they can end up in the body, and they can end up being problematic, in some way, and creating stress on the gut, stress on our immune system, all sorts of things, and manifesting as illness. So I think it's, if there are people in your life that are going to be present for a long time, and this goes, just going back to the body image, so many of my clients say, oh, my mother, and it's like, but don't you want to have some compassion, because she had a struggle, maybe still has a struggle, and how awful that they still have a struggle in their 60s, 70s and 80s with loving their body. I mean, nobody wants to be in that position. So actually, just trying to see that as something that, if anything, you don't want to follow, you don't want to take with you, is going to be more powerful for you.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, body image is such an interesting one, isn't it? Whether it's coming down the female line, or whether it's the males in your life being judgmental of the female form, and then you taking that on yourself. It's other people's shit.
Yeah.
And we can take responsibility for how we feel about ourselves, rather
Yeah.
than looking at ourselves through the eyes of others. I mean, it doesn't even make sense, does it? And yet that's often what we're doing. It's learning, yeah, we can make a decision over how we feel about ourselves. It doesn't have to come from external forces.
How did you have any kind of, again, like tools initially to, because I often say this is like a trance state that we sometimes go into. We don't even know we're doing it. And I think now with our phones, social media, we can go back into old patterns so quickly, even though we've got these resolutions to be different and boundaries and all these things, we can be drawn in because technology is at our fingertips. And I actually said to a client today that I feel with technology, we just need this kind of flexible discipline where it's like, it's not going anywhere, we have a need for it, and you might want to have some connection through social media, but we have to have a level of discipline, else it consumes you, and it really does consume a lot of your thought processes. But I wonder if you had any ways of almost like snapping out of the trance, that you...
Well, I think, yeah, being present is, in an ideal world, as you say, a lot of spiritual teachers, that it's all talking about trying to get into a place of presence. And what things bring you into presence? I mean, for me, it's being in nature. But I would say I've developed that over time to be able to bring it into other areas of my life. When you're driving, you can choose to be in your head, or you can choose to be actually just driving your car. Any act, when you're cooking, you could be constant. It's what acts do you find bring you into the moment, and then bringing that into your life as much as possible. And I do think being in nature is really helpful, because if you observe, then you're not in your head. If you observe what's around you, I think the more you are in a present state, the easier it is to notice when something comes into your head. You can think to yourself, you have that tiny little gap between being present and having that thought, where you can think, is this actually benefiting me to have this thought? It's like, but you have to create a bit of quietness to be able to think, is this working for me? Rather than just being in your head constantly and just having this kind of record playing constantly. Yeah, that question, which I know we've talked about before, but like, is this serving me? We all can reflect on that, can't we? If you're doing something, if you're eating a big bar of chocolate, is this serving me? Now, it might be, yeah, it is, because I'm feeling hormonal and I need a bit of sugar, and this makes me feel really good. Or you might be thinking, no, I'm eating this because I've already eaten a load of other stuff today and I'm just feeling a bit shit and sad and I'm just going to stuff this down. So it's having a bit of self awareness over why you're doing things, and then just reflecting on that.
One thing that would be really powerful for you to, because I know that you'll reassure people of this. I think firstly that it takes a lot of time. I often feel like I'm 10, 20 years behind you, but you've had a profound influence on me. And the more I've practiced meditation and like yin yoga, like slower forms, more time in nature, as you said, I'm able to go, God, this is peaceful. Like, why have I not spent more time here? And I think I mentioned before, so Miranda talks about giving your inner critic a name, and that inner critic often comes in and is like, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be just hanging out in nature and resting. Who do you think you are? And I think she called her Sergeant Sandy, and in the end would be like batting her out of her head, and this is what I need, this is what is kind of really helping to resource my body. But a lot of the other things that we're using as crutches or dependent upon, in my experience, and I'm sure you're going to say the same, start to, in like the need and the drive to do them gets less and less and less, is what I'm trying to say. So like your relationship with food changes, your need to go for runs all the time. For me, it was like running for endorphins, and fitness and maintaining weight and all that. It's gone. And what's interesting is that you almost go a bit too far the other way first, and then gradually I keep circling back around to balance. But it's because I'm listening to my body. But it's not an easy journey, but it eventually becomes the easiest way to live.
I think you just start to, and as you say, the peace and the calm and the contentment that you get from not being in these other states becomes more and more appealing. And then our bodies naturally want what's best for us. We on some level, we're not trying to self-sabotage, are we? That's just a reaction. So I think we naturally want to come into balance, and balance is not a straight line. It's constantly tipping, but being aware that, oh, I've tipped, oh, that's okay, I'm going to bring myself back. I've got tools, I've got things that I know make me feel good, that aren't harmful and are loving. I mean, I always find the symbol of, the yin yang symbol really helpful as a visual, just because I think it's basically saying the line is wiggly. It's not a straight line. We have dark and light with us. We have paradox within us. We have contrast within us. We might be one side, but we're like order and chaos. Some people like more order in their life. Other people cope with more chaos. You can't just be one or the other. You have to have both. So when you can acknowledge that you have both sides of yourself, you just kind of meander through, and you're going to go into one a bit more, but you'll naturally want to return to the other. I think knowing that, don't judge yourself any of these things to be good or bad. If you overdo one thing, just know that there's things that you can do to bring you back to the other side. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think some of that is also having the courage to speak up sometimes and know when you need, the kind of the peace and quiet. And so you have to step out of some responsibilities. And if you're the sort of person, again, lots of my clients are kind of type A's, perfectionists, show up, very caring, lovely people, show up for everybody. And that's amazing. Like we human beings just love to help. We do. But sometimes the list has got big and we've missed out one person on that list. And that's when, like you said, it can be that we're kind of too on that yang side and just, all the time on the go. And again, this is when the body's going to pull the rug on that situation. So part of the kind of, definitely my kind of healing journey has involved saying no a lot more and not being the one that turns up and fixes everybody. Actually telling myself it would be better if I modeled self-care so that when others go through a similar experience, it's not my job to fix them, but I can tell them, or they can see what I do and they can go, I want the same thing, and I'm going to do the same practices. I'm going to live the same way. But a lot of it means that you have to disappoint people. And I love the phrase disease to please. You have to scrap that And that can be really hard, I think, initially. But I heard another really good phrase, which was self-care is also stewardship of self. It is guarding, because also the thing that I discovered the hard way was if you don't look after yourself, eventually the body calls time on it, and body keeps a score and the body always wins, and then you're no good to anybody. So
Yeah,
how did
yeah,
that work out? Whereas if there'd been more, and I think some of it is ego based for sure. I've looked at my ego for a long time, and I've loved some of the writings about ego and how society drives egoic behaviors. I don't see myself as selfish, but a lot of the things that I was trying to do were about validation. And in a way, ego was stepping in because it wanted to be known as someone who could fix and help everybody. And again, this comes back to that attachment, authenticity as a child, possibly, and just not content with, you can show up, you can work hard, you can do your bit, but then also retreat and look after yourself, and that's great as well. You haven't got to always be present. And it's been really humbling, I think, illness. But the nice thing is taking that humility forward and not thinking about me, but more us. And I've said that to Matt. Like, I think a big takeaway has been we need to form bigger connections, within friendships, within communities, all of us do, so that we can reach out to different people and spread the load. And we're not always, kind of relying on self or relying on one or two other people. And if you are kind of showing up for family, you've got that community to help you in some way. And I would say here in Portugal, we're really lucky in that we're in a very small town. We're in a village outside of town, but the community's um, energy is quite big, because it's a bit of a spiritual, it's the West Coast, there's a lot of spiritual kind of communities here, but there's lots of volunteering, there's lots of offering to help, or kind of, does anyone need this? And it's really nice to see, I have to say. Like, it's
I just thought of another thing as well, actually, when you talk about in terms of reflecting, how do we kind of move from one place of maybe more suffering into less suffering? We should ask ourselves, what do we want more of in our life? Like, if you have a life which is really busy and intense, and you think, oh, I could really would like some more, or of the opposite of that, just being able to acknowledge that that's one of your needs is really important, because then you can start to move towards it. I think we being really ambitious and driven, and that's not a negative thing, but it can be out of balance. I
yeah,
think, you talk about your ego, like, we all have an ego that kind of plays big or small in different areas of our life. That's all good unless it starts to be detrimental. If it becomes detrimental, then we think, okay, what do I need to be doing the opposite of to be able to push? For me, I play small, my ego, and that's not doing me any favors. I actually need to be more pushing out more. But you have to be able to acknowledge how you are in order to be able to do the opposite. For you, you were maybe pushing too hard, so now you have to do more of the retreating.
yeah.
It's been able to look at yourself, say, where am I? What do I need? I'm two parts. And another thing that kind of came to mind, it wasn't until my mid to late 30s that I realized I was quite introverted. I didn't really understand what, like, that term. It wasn't something that I'd studied as a child. When you're in school, if you're introverted, being in a class of 30 kids in schools of hundreds of thousands of people, not hundreds, and thousands of people, that's not an ideal environment for you. So school probably isn't going to be that much fun. It was only as an adult that I realized, oh, I'm introverted. I like these environments. I like to be with this number of people. This makes me tick. This is how I need to support myself. That doesn't mean that I never have extrovert qualities. Like, I know people now that are extrovert and that like to spend a lot more time on their own. So it's understanding ourselves, like, in these different polarities. We can be this, but we do also need the other side.
Balance, yeah.
And neither is right or wrong or good or bad.
Yeah, because
But we will be ever changing.
I've heard it simplified quite a lot, that if you're an introvert, then if you go in front of a lot of people, you then need a lot of quiet time, me time. And then if you're an extrovert, you get resourced by being in front of a lot of people. But I just think we're all a bit more complex than that. And I think
But
situation
yeah,
is.
yeah, I mean, I agree that that's on one. That's something that I've definitely recognised. When I'm in big groups, I need to retreat afterwards and restore. But we are ever changing as well. But it's good to be able to know this about ourselves. and
Yeah.
therefore know what we need. I used to think a lot of my introverted traits, until I recognized what they were flaws.
Yeah. Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you think you're flawed, you're gonna probably be beating yourself with other sticks, aren't you?
Yeah.
And that's where the level of self-awareness is needed. If someone's trying to meet a need through whatever tool they're using, exercise, food, whatever, maybe some self-reflection is really important, because it could be that they're just beating themselves up over something that is just part of who they are. Like, I don't know, we are complex, and I think self-love, self-compassion is about accepting all sides of ourselves, and not all sides are going to be yay woo. Like, we might not deem them as most positive. You might think, oh, I'm antisocial. Well, no, I'm not antisocial. I'm just a bit more introverted and don't want to be out all the time.
Yeah.
That's not it. Yeah, it helps to kind of reflect on the whole of ourselves
Yeah,
and
no,
not judge any of it.
no, and I think this is again something that is becoming a bit more apparent is again, I think social media is a big reason for this, that we haven't shown up as authentically as we could because we've seen the highlight reel in most people's lives. And that's maybe affected how we present ourselves. And what's really interesting for Matt and I is we'll often follow people in our industry and then we meet them in real life. And there's often a kind of backstory or a side story going on that's nothing like you've seen on social media. And sometimes there's a reason for that, that not everyone has to overshare, and some things are very private, and you understand that. But I do really think, as well as schools being taught nutrition, I'm hoping some kind of social media competency is going to come through, because it gives such a distorted view of reality. And I only realize it when I speak to a lot of clients as well, and they'll kind of ask about various different things and kind of messaging coming through on social media. And it's like, gosh, I've just realized that you think that you need to defer to many people, especially experts on social media, many of which are not experts when it comes to your health. Like you're
Yeah.
deferring and outsourcing everything from what you need to eat, what supplements to take, how to relax, how to meditate, what's, your morning routine, what it needs to look like. And it's like, no, this to me is all of it is there's principles that Matt and I have always said this, we collect principles that are going to work. We're so biologically complex that me and you do not eat the same nutrition despite doing exactly the same goals. We have radically different diets and they work for us. And that may change, again, as long as we're connected to self. I think we'll evolve that with age, we'll involve that with illness, we'll involve it intuitively, and we'll go to trusted sources if we're struggling with that. But I think Googling stuff, going into discussion forums, Facebook groups to seek advice is kind of really overcomplicating. And one of the best bits of advice I had actually when I first fell ill and kind of had a big battle with COVID was get out all the long COVID groups, because it's actually, you do read a lot of distressful stories, but you read so many different experiences that it becomes very hard to know, well, which one's going to work for me? And all of a sudden I'm overwhelmed. And so I think in many ways, putting together your kind of morning routine, your mindfulness habits and practices, it's a really nice adventure to go on. And the nutrition side, same. I have clients who, feel amazing, ranging from carnivore to fully plant-based to somewhere in the middle, and some people don't touch, foods that they find hyperpalatable, and some people are great doing moderation. It's all, a journey that we go on. And I think the main thing is staying connected to yourself is more likely to get you the principles that are right for you.
I agree. And I think when you talk about the influence of social media, I mean, there has always been media that has had potentially a derogatory impact on us. To me, when I hear that, I think we have to choose to balance within the balance of our life, this constant pushing and pulling. We have to balance the amount of energy we put into external influences as to what we do to our internal influences. So you can read things from the outside world, but if you're only ever receiving information from outside and never listening to what's coming from the inside and taking time to listen to, sitting quiet, it's we have to find that balance ourselves. I think it's harder with kids, maybe because they're only ever looking outside, and we get into those habits of only ever seeking external. I mean, I don't really enjoy external influences, my influences tend to come up from within, because if I have an external influence and it makes me feel bad, I just think, well, that's not serving me. But I think it's if you're doing a lot of looking out, if you're trying to seek, then that's, to me, highlights the fact that you need to start going within more.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people are reporting to me that I'm seeing the kind of diagnosis of ADHD, and it's just rife. It's like everybody, tons of my clients are coming back saying, "Oh, I'm finally glad I have been diagnosed with this," and I understand it, and I understand. I just question sometimes. I'll often say, "But when do we train attention?" And this is where I think mindfulness and meditation has been profound for me, because suddenly I'm writing again, like for hours, able to sit and write content and focus. And I've always struggled. So I've always had to go and work in a library, or like I just can't work at home. And I have environments that really are conducive to my attention. But I've never actually gone down the TikTok route. I already feel like I have enough noise in my life. But actually, when we get information about from social media companies talking to us about, as a brand, this is what you should be doing. We're told now that the attention span is less than 20 seconds. So try and make your content snappy, changey in 20 seconds. So we're actually, the media content is driving attention spread as much as possible. And if we're doing that, then it gets harder and harder to sit still. It gets harder and harder to, as you say, observe thoughts and go, wait a minute, catch yourself in the trance. And I do think there's something to be said for, as I said, that flexible discipline of like, delete some of the apps. I mean, if your friends are on Facebook and you love that chat and it's your connection, great. But do we need 4 or 5 of them on our phone? I find, even I would say like WhatsApp, I'm just about, I can just about manage it. But it's now that I've moved country, and obviously you have school friends and uni friend groups and all those things. And I try to be really careful, because otherwise if I'm doing any of it before bed, it ruins sleep. Like that's, but I do also think it's good to think about, if we want this inner peace, if we want this stillness, if we want to not have, I've actually called it the mad woman in the attic, when it really starts to loop and loop and loop and really doesn't serve you, and it's just a load of like bullshit. Then when are we trying to train attention? When are we stepping away from the noise and being still and being quiet? And I think I'll just talk through a few things that have helped me, but I'd love you to tell us a little bit about your routine and so things that you do. But for me personally, it started with like 10-minute meditations. I've built up very gradually. Some days I can't quieten the noise, so I put music on and just do like almost like a yoga nidra, full body relaxation. Some days it's just 5-10 breaths lying on the bed. But I find just having things like classical music or film scores playing, or I like incense, and Matt has come to absolutely love it. I get in now and he's lit the incense because he's like, God, that smell just makes my whole nervous system go, ah. And candles. And they kind of have become a ritual for us, first thing in the morning and last thing at night, as a signal to our bodies, like, this is your time. This is, reflection time. You could map journals. I don't journal. I've never managed to get on with that yet. It might come. And I've done a bit of things like Qigong. If I feel too energetic and stuff, I'll do Qigong, or again, just a few yoga poses on the floor. And the sensory feedback is really powerful for us to kind of go, right. And if we're being really good, the phones go in the kitchen and when they're not looked at. Sometimes we slip, like it just happens. But that's kind of a nice way that we're trying to bookend our day, disconnecting from the world and reconnecting in our home. And as I said, the senses are the things that kick in that help us to do that. And eventually an association develops. I have to tell you a quick story. Hamish, I noticed the other day, every time a diesel car goes past, he goes nuts. And I was like, why is he doing this? It's because our car is diesel and he thinks it's Matt. So if it's just me and him walking and a diesel car goes past, he's now associating every smell of diesel as Matt's coming, because occasionally Matt has driven past us on a walk and then stopped. And I think it's really the same with the candles and the incense. Is like, you literally get this association that kind of, without even knowing it, it's really lovely. It's like a little bit of a wind down.
I mean, it doesn't take too long to create new habits, does it? And when you create new habits, old ones fall away. Yeah, I agree. Like the sensory, in terms of taste, smell, touch, these are all quite useful in just being able to take you into a more present state.
You mentioned to me you have your favorite mug in the morning, and you often have a
Yeah, well, today I chose a herbal tea, and it was a joy. Well, you can't see it. It's a joy pucker tea, but I chose that like mindfully
yeah.
because that's what I wanted to bring into this conversation. And
Oh,
I think it's just being like conscious with your choices. And not every choice is going to be conscious, but it's going to be like, if you're going to choose a drink, do you really want that drink? Is that going to bring you a lot of pleasure? Or it it's what brings you joy? Does if it's, you wouldn't burn a candle that has a smell that you don't like. You choose one that you like the smell of. So it's kind of making small choices like that. I've my mindful practice, I'm more of a morning person. For the last few months, I haven't always done this, but I get up and do yoga at 6 in the morning, which I'm enjoying for 20 minutes or half an hour. And then I sit and I've been meditating. And this is not, I know this is not probably most people's how they start their day. And it didn't used to be mine, but actually I love it now, and I'm motivated. And when you were talking about your things that you choose to do, the word discipline came to mind. And discipline has come up for me in recent years because you always think, oh, discipline, oh, that's hard. But actually, discipline is an absolute joy and easy if you're doing something that you enjoy. You just kind of get up and you do it. From the outside world, that, oh, you look really disciplined, you get up and you do this, and I'm like, it's no hardship. It's kind of, it becomes a really pleasurable thing. So whatever if you, it's finding things that make you feel good and doing more of them. And so yeah, yoga, meditation, being in nature, sitting looking out the window, watching a bird. I mean, I'm a bit of a, I wouldn't say I'm a bird watcher, but I like watching birds.
yeah.
um in the autumn, watching a leaf fall off a tree, taking that time to notice really small changes within the garden, um, smiling at a stranger, letting someone out in traffic. All of these things is you have a choice. If you're in your head, you're not going to be paying any attention. But if you are actually being present, you can choose to make loving choices. And the more loving choices you make for yourself, the more you do those for others. And that kind of has that ripple effect of impacting the world around you. So it's not all people. I mean, I was talking to a friend the other day about, I said, oh, where's your journey with self-love? And I think for a lot of people, it's quite triggering because they feel it's really self-indulgent to like be self-loving and self-compassionate. When in reality, it's a bit like if you take care of you, the old adage of the air thing on a plane, if you look after yourself, you can do a lot more for other people,
Yeah,
should
yeah,
you want to. You don't burn out as much because when you get to a point where you're going to tip into not feeling that great, so you retreat into whatever it is that's going to kind of be more nourishing. The more you make tiny little acts that please you, whether it's lighting a candle, it's such a simple thing to do, but a flame can be very calming and peaceful. The more you do that, the more you can give out to the rest of the world.
and I
And
think
that's,
like
yeah.
pause and make better decisions generally about where is it great to invest your energy and where are you probably wasting it. Whereas you can't see that. I think I had this discussion just a couple of days ago with someone who was really trying to change somebody in their life, and I was like, I think you just need to step back and let that person go through the journey, and it's their journey. All you can do is be present and model good, like mindfulness and all these other things that you feel would be helpful. But the more that we try and micromanage and kind of nag and become invasive in other people, it's exhausting for us, but it creates resistance, and they often do the opposite, so it doesn't work out. And I think once you slow down and pause and have your mindfulness practices, you can start to see like, yeah, that's a waste of my time.
Yeah. And
And I,
think to yourself, what do I love?
yeah,
So like with that client, rather than her focusing on that other person, like what do you love? What do
yeah.
you love doing? What do you enjoy doing? Can you do that today?
Second thing that I think when you said, when most people, you said ask yourself what would you like more in your life, everyone will answer time. I feel, I'm sure everyone will say I need more time, I need 8 days a week. And the reason is because we are wasting a lot of time. And I don't mean that critically to anybody, but because we care so much, we're investing ourselves everywhere and spreading ourselves thinly, giving, often over delivering at work, over compensating in friendships and family because we feel we can and we care, and actually when we start to buy time back and also look at things like doom scrolling and where you are truly wasting time, when you buy it back, you then do feel that you can slow down. And I just had a little moment thinking about when we started to meet and go for food. One thing that struck me was you eat so slowly. I was
Yeah, my
like,
family can't stand it.
I inhale food. Like I am so often get criticized for talking too fast, and I eat and drink too fast as well. I'm often kind of like, oh, it's over. And but again, this is one of the causes behind overeating. And I'm guilty of definitely going sometimes getting too busy, going too long without food, coming in, opening the fridge and inhaling everything, feeling terrible, but then even still feeling hungry and wanting more. So actually, the more I've started to practice again, slowing down and, kind of sitting at a table, eating slower, it everything, you appreciate the food more, your appetite satiation is better, you don't tend to then fall into those habits that we're all trying to kick, which is overeating, and it does happen naturally. But again, we kind of have to be a bit more like my grandparents were very slow in terms of when I used to go around there, they would eat slowly, they would spend a lot of time in the greenhouse, they used to watch the birds out the window for hours. It was all very slow, there was no internet, there was no rushing everything to get onto something. And I think about that a lot now, and it's like, why are we rushing as well is a good question.
Well, I used to be such a rusher. Like I couldn't walk anywhere without feeling I was rushing. But the number of times I would be doing that and I would have, I don't mean an accident, but I would kind of fall, or my rushing, then the consequence of that was kind of something going wrong. I realized that the energy of rushing was not getting me to where I wanted to be. It was kind of actually a bit destructive and frazzled. One thing when you said about time, people want more time. I mean, time, what is time? If not that we're going to go down that rabbit hole, but there's time to do what? Like, if someone wants more time to do what, you have to define what is it that you want time to do. Like, the more you can be clear about what it is that you want, you can move towards it. To me, wanting time is like saying, I want sky. I mean, it's there, isn't it? It's
Yeah,
there for the taking, but it's like, what do you want it for? I think and then you can be clear about okay, how do I move towards bringing more of that in?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Because then the scroll, then if you're making the decision to scroll or do the thing that you've said that you would like more time to do, it's then down to you. What do I choose to do? You might choose to scroll. That's your decision, no judgment. Or you might choose to do the thing that you've said that you wanted apparently to do more of.
yeah,
But I think it's give yourself an alternative of the things that you actually want to do, because otherwise we stay in the mindless state. I
yeah.
just think, do I want more peace? Do I want to be out in nature more? Do I want to spend more time with friends and family? Do I want to spend more time sitting on the TV, on the sofa, watching a good series? Well, now you've said that, you can put your phone down if you want and maybe watch that program.
Read that book.
Yeah, I feel like we have to, in order to have what we want, we have to know what that is in order to be able to move towards it.
I think I
And
was going to say that, and a part of that might be doing a bit of a values. Like, I'm a big fan of telling everyone to do an inset day and like just go to a coffee shop with a nice notepad, order your favorite drink, and actually think about your values in life. And when an opportunity to do an activity, or because life just gets busy, question how many of your activities or blocks of time in your day is aligned with your values. Like, is it where you want to be? Is it aligned with what you love in life? Is it, so like you just said, if it was, if you kind of realize you're struggling with isolation, loneliness, and definitely when we got here, we realized that Matt and I both said we've struggled because we've dedicated so much time to our business. We haven't really integrated into, all of our friends had children. We weren't kind of in that circle, and that we were to some degree lonely. So we wanted more connection and friendship. So it became a bit more of a priority than it has in the past. But not that, that kind of overrode anything, but it made us go out of our comfort zone a little bit. And when we were tired, we would go, yeah, but let's just go and see how we feel. And if we don't like it, we leave. We're not doing things we don't like. And it's been profound in terms of we're so pleased we did it. And it's only when you have nourishing connections that you realize how much you needed them. And when we both fell sick this weekend, what was lovely is we had 4 or 5 messages drop in of, can I get you a shop? I've just dropped off some herbs from the garden. Do you need Hamish walk in? And we were just like, wow, this is like family. You know, we never, and part of that was us not investing the time, not knowing that we needed it. And that was all rushing and working and, you know, just not taking time to think about our happiness, our needs, you know. So I think we can all believe, like you said, we don't have time to do this stuff in terms of even think about it or reflect or think about values or, but it is actually, I think it's so worth it. You know, it's just.
And sometimes, you know, if someone's struggling to, you know, if you ask them that question and said they want time and you say, oh, to do what? Oh, no, if you ask them, what do you want time to do? And they're like, well, I don't know. I haven't got time to think about it. We could say, well, what did you enjoy doing when you were a kid?
Yeah, yeah.
That's always a good starting point. We all have something that we enjoy. I like sitting in trees, writing awful poems. I don't like to do that as an adult, but
Yeah,
even just going back to that place and
yeah,
reflecting on what did I enjoy as a kid, that starts to open up little parts of our brain so we can start to reconnect to those ideas.
yeah.
Um,
All the things like singing, cooking, crafting, drawing, that like there's so many things that we ditch because it's like, well, I'm not good enough, or it's, you know, like you said, I'm an adult now, I've got more responsibility. But then we, like Matt and I do see this pattern of the busyness is often because what will I do if I'm not busy? I don't like anything that I have outside of the work or, you know, kind of perhaps busy social life, but sitting still is kind of awkward and, you know, and it,
Uncomfortable.
the home and the relationships and things like that also need addressing. But yeah, there's a discomfort with just sitting with yourself. And that I think can be, again, it's more that it doesn't end well to keep ourselves that busy and that driven all the time.
I agree, and that's where the set like the five senses are helpful when we think about, you know, making choices to from a self-compassion state. You know, if you wanted to say burn a candle, what smells do you like? If you can then start to explore those smells, or if I like eating, what do you want to eat? You could start cooking. You could look at a recipe book and look up recipes of a particular cuisine that you like. It starts off with tiny micro
Changes.
choices that actually just start to open up these areas of you that have been closed where we don't think about our needs, and we start to think, oh, I quite like this. And then you might look up a book on aromatherapy if you like smelly candles or whatever it might be. Or you might look up on a book on a certain subject because you've remembered that this was something that you enjoyed as a kid. I think we close down, don't we? And
Yeah.
again, not to use the same, to me, I view the world a lot through energetically, like the polarity of that push and pull. If we've closed down, how do we expand? We expand by thinking new thoughts or accessing thoughts which previously, you know, whether we haven't. It's if you're closed, we need to open. How do we open? Do I need to open physically and like move my body? Do I need to open my mind and read books or watch films on subjects that I'm interested in? Open my palate? Do I need to try foods? Maybe taste some food from a country that I've always fancied trying but never got round to looking. You know, we all have to take responsibility for making these little bits of action. But if you ask the questions, then there are answers, aren't there, within us? But we don't have to try and make massive leaps. Just tiny, tiny little steps, and then it naturally becomes more and more a natural state.
And I think also one thing to add, like if you're a parent, I often have clients feedback, I just can't, I feel so guilty. I need to, you know, it's the family first and their needs are often last. But one thing that I often mention is really we're kind of modeling, you know, aspirational, self-care is aspirational to every generation. And we really want to show what that looks like. And I remember as a kid, I was always happy when my parents were happy, you know, and that's kind of interesting for me that I obviously had that I was very closely linked to them. And when my mum was unwell and bedridden with back problems, I remember thinking like, I can't go out and have a good time. And, you know, and it's interesting as we've got older, I became a bit of a nag to her because I don't want her to end up in that situation again. But it's something that, you know, I've often said to clients, and I think even you on occasion just said like, it meant the world to me when my mum was going off and doing her thing. Like, when she
Yeah.
was better and she would go off and see her friends, and she had various different kind of businesses that she was involved in. And I would love that. That was my favorite time. I didn't feel, you know, the balance was, and I know the balance is hard for parents, but if you've been there a lot, I think that there's a lot, you could even communicate it if you're concerned about it. And same if you're not a parent and you're thinking about your other half, or, work, even if you just want to communicate that you need a little bit more space time. Often people are, as I said, since COVID especially, are working overtime anyway and not necessarily paid for. So if you start to say, I need a decompression walk at this time, and I'd like a walk after lunch, I've seen these now being referred to as like mental health walks at lunchtime and stuff. Like, it's our right to go and get some daylight exposure and not be stuck at a desk all through the day. So I think, but ultimately, as you said, it kind of comes from courage and
But I
self.
think when it comes to parenting, for those with kids, you've got to think about what behaviour you're modelling. Do you
Yeah.
want to model behaviour of a parent who never takes care of their own needs, who is a martyr, who basically slogs, and then probably complains about it? And I say that as someone who's definitely fallen into that category at times.
I'm not
Or
even
do
a
you want to
parent
model
for that.
behaviour of someone who knows themselves, who has their own interests, who is joyful? I'm not saying we're like this all the time, but yeah, we can find joy, and that is going to be nicer for everybody around us, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Oh, I'm conscious of the time, so we've been chatting for a long time, but it's been amazing, and I'm so glad to finally get you on. It'd be awesome if you could share where people can find out a bit more about what you do, Instagram, websites.
Yeah, I have a website. It is a pod hyphen, so that's pod hyphen reflexology.co.uk. I am on Instagram, not super active, but I can be messaged there on pod, reflexology, and Reiki. Um,
We'll share it all
um,
in the show notes as well, so we'll share your details.
yeah, and yeah,
Thank
thank
you
you.
so much. And I know we're going to be involving you in some fit food retreats later in the year. Hopefully, if we can make dates work and venues fit. And I can't wait to have you. I'm sure everyone's going to. We've actually talked for a long time, haven't we, about walking is a big part of was a big part of us meeting and talking, and it became medicinal to me. It was amazing. And I've often said I would just love getting groups together to walk with people like you, who we could just have conversations, and just really helpful. And I think some of the advice that you've given me, I know many people would benefit from. So hopefully we can make that happen this year. Fingers.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think walking is just such a nice way to. I find I often have quite creative thoughts when I'm in motion, and I'm sure a lot of people are the same. And it's a nice way to interact with people, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's lovely. I get real downloads. I think energy and motion, as in you're walking, so you're kind of lots of ideas come. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. Conscious of your time, and I'm sure we'll have you back for more chat as well.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye, everyone.